A new study is making headlines suggesting that eating more eggs is linked to a lower risk of dementia. And I want to talk about this because while the headlines sound exciting, the real story is kind of buried inside the data, and it's more interesting than the soundbite, I think. I'm Dr. Bret Scher. I'm the medical director at Metabolic Mind and a cardiologist focused on metabolic health, and I think eggs can be an important part of that. So today, I want to walk you through what this study actually shows, what it doesn't show, and why the baseline data alone in this study really makes it worth your attention. So let's start with something I think is critically important whenever a nutrition study makes the news, and that's we need to ask, what kind of study is this? And is it a strong study, a weak study? What can it actually tell us? So this is an observational study. Researchers followed a group of people over time, used kind of low-quality food frequency questionnaires to record what they ate, and examined who developed dementia and who didn't. They found an association between higher egg consumption, both at the low level of egg consumption and the higher level compared to none, and an association with a lower risk of dementia. Now that's interesting. It does not prove eggs prevent dementia, so let's start there. Observational research cannot establish causation. It can identify patterns worth investigating, and in this case, the pattern, I think, is worth a closer look. But here's what I want you to focus on. Before we even get into the outcome data, you look at who was eating no eggs or fewer eggs, and the lowest egg consumption group compared to the highest. The lowest egg consumption group exercised more. They had a lower BMI. They were more educated. They were less likely to smoke. By almost every conventional measure of health and lifestyle, the people eating the fewest amount of eggs were healthier going into the study. And furthermore, added to this, the highest egg consumers also ate more meat and fewer whole grains. They had this dietary pattern that many nutrition researchers would traditionally flag as higher cardiovascular and metabolic risk. Probably not the truth, but that's what a lot of people believe. So here's the question that the data forces us to ask, though. If the lowest egg group had better baseline health, better lifestyle habits, and a dietary pattern more aligned with conventional health guidelines, why did they not show a clear protective advantage in dementia outcomes? When the group that looks healthier on paper does not outperform the group eating the most eggs, that's a meaningful signal. Now, again, it doesn't prove eggs are beneficial, but it really weakens, if not eliminates, the argument that they're harmful. How can the less healthy group have less dementia if they're eating something that's harmful, right? It doesn't quite make sense. But let's pause for 1 second and talk about the funding, because that's come up a bit in social media and is worth discussing. The study was funded in part by the National Egg Board. Industry funding doesn't automatically invalidate the research, but it is a legitimate reason to look more carefully at the methodology and ask whether there are design choices that could have introduced bias to favor the eggs. But interestingly, this study was also funded by the National Cancer Institute. That's a federal research body that obviously has no financial stake in egg consumption. And personally, reviewing the methodology, I didn't find meaningful red flags aside from the inherent weak observational methodology. But as I mentioned, that would actually go against eggs, like sort of not be in favor of egg consumption because of the healthy user bias. So kind of interesting. If you found anything in the methodology concerning for bias, please let me know. All right, but let's zoom out for a second and put this in context, because eggs have a kind of a complicated history in nutrition science. For decades, eggs were villainized, primarily because of their cholesterol content. The logic seemed straightforward to some, I guess, at the time. Dietary cholesterol can raise blood cholesterol. High blood cholesterol can lead to heart disease. Therefore, eggs cause heart disease. So limit your eggs, protect your heart. But obviously, it's not that simple, and that chain of logic does not hold up at all under scrutiny. We know that for most people, dietary cholesterol has a relatively modest effect on blood cholesterol, if at all. And for those who do have an increased cholesterol, it can be high HDL, and lower triglycerides that go along with that with eating more eggs. So that's not going to raise your risk for sure. And dietary cholesterol does not equal heart risk. And this matters because eggs are one of the most nutrient-dense whole foods available. They're complete protein with an excellent amino acid profile. They've got high leucine content for muscle protein synthesis. They've got choline, essential for brain health and chronically kind of underconsumed in a lot of Western diets. Full of healthy fats, natural nutrient matrix that your body recognizes and uses efficiently. So the case against eggs was already weaker than the messaging suggested, and new evidence like this really seems to make it even weaker, if not just disappear. So here's what I want you to take away from this study and I guess from this conversation. Observational research has real limitations, of course. This study does not prove eggs prevent dementia, and we should not claim it does. Overclaiming the evidence is how nutrition science kind of loses credibility and can really confuse patients. But the healthy user bias embedded in this dataset is genuinely meaningful. When the group that looks healthier by every conventional metric fails to outperform the highest egg eaters on cognitive outcome, that's worth noting. The bias was against the eggs in this study, and the eggs still seem to outperform not eating eggs. So it adds to a growing body of evidence that the argument against eggs simply doesn't hold up. So can we finally put this egg debate to rest? Based on the totality of the evidence, I think the answer is yes. But of course, I hate that term, totality of evidence. But still, I think the answer is yes. Eggs are nutrient-dense, whole foods that belong in a healthy diet. If you're still being told by your nutritionist, dietitian, doctor that you should avoid eggs because of cholesterol, really that advice is not evidence-based, and it's worth having another conversation. All right, so I hope this was helpful. If it was, please like and subscribe and leave us a comment. Thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Bret Scher. We'll see you here next time at Metabolic Mind, a nonprofit initiative of Bazooki Group.